The CEO of LinkedIn does all his one-to-ones, walk talks. So he tried it once, and it was so beneficial for the organisation, for him and for his health, and for everyone else, that he does it. And of course, when the CEO does it, so LinkedIn is full of people. If you go into any LinkedIn office, you'll find people wandering around, either in the grounds if they're out of town, or in the building if it's pouring with rain, or outside if it's a nice day. But it's become a kind of cultural embodiment of the way LinkedIn likes to be seen as being kind of funky and different, and also highly productive. And they would argue that the productivity they get out of those 20 minutes is massively more than if they were locked in a room. And I guess if you're the CEO, you just have meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. He would never leave his room. So he does know.
It's a very old idea.
It's an old idea, yeah. It is.
Peripatetic philosophers.
Yes, 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 yeah, because they didn't have any officers. I'll just show you, just very quickly. I was going to do this later, I'll just jump to it now, just very quickly. But this is from someone called Chuck Hillman, who's a professor of neuroscience and sports science, basically. And I got to know him because I tweeted this photograph from one of his talks, and I got a very charming person called @Neurobollocks on Twitter saying to me, you are the most naive idiot I've ever come across. Anyone could Photoshop that. Give me a head and I'll Photoshop exactly that in 10 seconds and claim it's all to do with brain activity. So I thought I'd get in touch with Chuck Hillman and said, Chuck, there's all this stuff going around. And I got the most amazing email from Chuck saying, I wish this photo never got out. I'm sick of taking dog's abuse virtually every day of my life. And he said, and he sent me the data. He said, this is real data. Can you still hear me? So.
Keeps dropping out.
Keeps dropping out. It's switching itself off. Is that better? Yeah. Can you keep your monitor? Just keep telling me. So for some reason it switches itself off, so I apologise. I'm not doing it deliberately, just to make people think that shouting is a good thing. I'm not, I promise I'm not. So he sent me the data, and it's the same person. And basically, this data was based on this analysis that he did with lots and lots of people, but this was particularly significant. This guy is a man sitting quietly for 20 minutes, reading, but basically doing what we do most of our lives, and then after a 20-minute walk. Not a 20-minute run up a hill, a 20-minute walk. And you can see the kind of flooding of oxygen into the brain and the readiness of the brain to be willing to do more work, the refreshment of the brain. It's a fascinating study. So it isn't photoshopped, it's genuine, based on genuine data, and I have the data. And Chuck Hillman is a good guy, if rather bad-tempered and annoyed at the world. He's saying, I will never tweet again, I'm sick to die, I hate all this. Why I'm a professor at the University of Illinois. Why don't people listen to me? And the answer is because that's the world we live in, Chuck. Let me just begin with the first session. You are the ones, says Rustica. I say, are you the ones? I think that there are such amazing issues around learning and development like we've not seen for a very long time. This quote, disruption in the air, comes from a Forbes magazine article that came out last week, saying this is the massive disruption that is going to affect everybody in learning and development, and will impact across organisations, big and small, public and private. So I think you could be the ones. So this is a slide by Josh Bersin, which some of you may have seen. It's actually, that was the report. It was one slide. There was no words around the report. It's just, that's it. It's an interesting slide. On the one hand, you could say it's probably the worst infographic in the world because it's incomprehensible. On the other hand, you can say, how can anyone pack so much information onto one little image, and therefore it's brilliant. But let me just take you through. I'm not going to read the damn thing to you. But basically, what Josh Burson is saying is that he says, who is the modern learner? I changed it to worker. Because it's not about, this is about work. And what he's saying, essentially, is that people at work are overwhelmed, impatient, and distracted. Now, is there anyone in the room who says, that is total rubbish? In my place, we're all completely in control. We are not distracted by anything. We're totally focused, and we have the patience of angels. You are? Good. Fine. Okay. So what we're going to do is hand over the second half of the conference to you. Because if we can all learn how to do that, then that will be job done. If we can all turn up to be like you. But what is the characteristics of modern work are that I'll just read a few things. 41% of the time, workers spend on things that offer little personal satisfaction and do not help them get work done. What is the number one of those? What is the thing we spend huge amounts of time on that doesn't actually help us? Email, email, phone, dealing with text messages and email message, it all merges into one eventually. So 41% of the time we see we're kind of wasting our life. Most learners won't watch videos, most anybody won't watch videos longer than 4 minutes. They get bored by anything longer than 4 minutes. So the great corporate comms 25 minutes with a chief executive, not going to be very successful in the world. If you're designing anything, if you're trying to attract people's attention, you have between 5 and 10 seconds to grab people's attention. Any kind of message, between 5 and 10 seconds. Workers are interrupted every 5 minutes, often by work applications, things they have to do, Yammer conversations, people tapping on their shoulder, other interruptions, technological interruptions. People unlock their smartphones, it says 9 times an hour. I read somewhere as more like 40 times an hour. People check. There's now this phenomenon called phantom buzz. I don't know if anyone can resonate with phantom. Phantom buzz is when you go, oh my goodness, and you reach in your purse, you reach in your bag, you go, oh no, it wasn't worth it. But you're convinced that you heard or you felt the phone buzz. Phantom buzz. We're so used to, and we're so processed to respond to the buzz that we imagine that it happens when it hasn't actually happened. It's amazing. So if you add all of that together, the modern learner, 1% of the week is available for learning, which equates to approximately 24 minutes. So the idea that people have got endless time to do all the things you want them to do for hours and hours is probably unrealistic. So impatient, overwhelmed, and distracted. Impatient, overwhelmed, distracted, and probably frustrated as well. And this is what we want. This is from an SAP Australian publication called Digital Experience Report. What SAP is saying, that this is what we demand in our lives. This is what everybody wants. They want simplification in the complexity of everything. They look for that one app that is just going to make their life easier, make it work for them. And I have, if I put on the number, showed you the number of apps on my phone and the number of apps on my iPad, most of which I've probably looked at once, and I would imagine some of them probably never. Why? Because I'm looking for something. But it's an app, you go, oh, that could be the one, that could be it. And you load it, you fire it up, and it's actually a little bit disappointing. It doesn't quite do what you wanted it to do. And then there's another one comes along the next week that promises to be even better, even faster. So you do that. So you want simplification. You want apps to be like you, to understand your life, to understand your world. You don't want stuff that is generic, that puts you in these big buckets of women aged X or New Zealand population. You want to be you, and you want individual treatment. You want it to be personalized, and you want it to engage you. You want it to be engaging. So you've got this massive pressure outside in our world. This is the world we all inhabit.
You've got a world where the first search for anything to do with something you can't do, anything to do with learning, is in the vast majority of the cases what? What do people do when they want to learn something? Google. First thing is Google. It's so obvious. Being 15%, but the vast majority, it's Google. And then if it ain't Google, it's you ask somebody. You don't look for packages, you don't look for, you want instant answers. How many of you have got a YouTube to fix a washing machine hose or to unblock a... We've all done it. And unbelievably, I still find it incredible. You put in Fisher and Paykel K176329/A 2007 fridge something, and up comes a YouTube. You go, how the hell did someone... Why did they do that? There are people whose lives are about putting those videos onto YouTube because they want to be loved. They want lots of hits. They want to... It's their life. It's become their life. In the same way that some people do things slightly less useful, like showing cats jumping upside down off walls and that kind of stuff. Some people do pose changing on fridges or on washing machines or whatever. Amazingly helpful. That's how we learn. That's our understanding of what learning is. 30 years ago, we probably had to enroll in an evening class, or we didn't do it. This is a digital imperative running through our lives, which would be crazy to ignore. And this is what John Chambers said. John Chambers is the longest, or was the longest serving CEO of a Fortune 500 company in the US. And he was 27 years, I think, CEO of Cisco, and now he's chair. And John Chambers is saying, there's this amazing transformation occurring. Digital disruption everywhere. And if you don't change, if you don't talk about the speed of innovation, you will get disrupted. And it will be a brutal disruption where the majority of companies will not exist in a meaningful way 10 to 15 years from now. The majority of companies will cease to exist in a meaningful way 10 to 15 years from now. Now, John Chambers could be a raving idiot, but he's run Cisco. He knows about digital disruption. His company was massively disrupted on one or two occasions where they just lost their market. They made some crazy decisions. Do you remember when they bought those cameras? What were they called, those digital cameras? I've forgotten the name of them now. Those little digital cameras which had a USB port built into them, and people used them. They're incredibly fashionable, and everyone had, I had one. And people were taking little videos, and you could just plug the USB straight into the laptop, and the software downloaded, you could edit. It was a really neat cameras. And Cisco bought them just at the moment when that market disappeared in favour of, where do we all shoot video now? On our phones. HD video on our phones. We don't have to use a USB port, it just transfers automatically. So I contacted Cisco in 2005 or 6, and Cisco told me they had 500,000 of these cameras in a warehouse in San Francisco, and if I could find a use for minimum of 1,000, they would ship them free. They would just desperately get rid of them. They'd given all the warranty ones away, and they just had warehouses of this stuff. And they'd spent a fortune on this company. They'd spent hundreds of millions of dollars. So Cisco made some bad errors. They got caught in routers when the market for routers just exploded. Routers, I should say. I've got to be very careful. One time I was in Australia, and I was in the days when it was fashionable to talk about routers, and that's why I was talking about this router and that router and plug this router and that router. Anyway, on and on I went. And finally, at the end of my talk, I was on a big stage, and some guy came to the end of the stage, and he looked up, and I looked down at him, and he looked up at me and he said, "Mate, just a little tip for you in Australia. If I were you, I'd talk about routers, not routers. Could be misinterpreted." And then he walked away, much to the hysterical amusement of everyone around him. Routers. Cisco got too involved in a market where there was no money, just mass market. So they're now into things like telepresence and Internet of Things and doing digital cities and massive, massive infrastructure projects. And Cisco's doing very, very well. So that's John Chambers. So we've got these two conflicting, but kind of linked things. Massive digital disruption. The world is changing all around us. And we've got the world of work is changing all around us. Work is not like work was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And some of us can remember what work was like. It is utterly changed. Whoa, this is to keep me finished very, very fast. So, where does it affect, how does it impact on learning? This is a report I wrote for the EFMD, which is the European Foundation for Management and Development. And what we did was, I worked with these companies, big companies, Siemens, engineering companies, banks, Santander, UBS, UniCredit, biocare companies, Pirelli, tyres, Sparebank, Solvay, chemicals, etc. Novartis, Pharma, Repsol, oil and gas, Swiss Re Insurance, or Swiss Re Insurance. Huge variety of companies working with the European offices, looking at how they were responding to digital disruption. And the very interesting first conclusion in the report is that learning is not leading the charge. There's massive needs to re-engineer workforce, to help people cope with these changes, to give them new skills. Is learning driving? No, they're not. They're following. They're rushing to catch up with what is already happening in their companies. And in some instances, learning is the least digital of all of the outputs from the organisation. I was in GE in Crotonville, which is their leadership centre in New York State. GE is now calling itself a digital manufacturing company. It is unbelievable. GE is big, dirty, hairy bits of kit that they make, whether it's medical imaging, aero engines, power plants, locomotives. Nothing that GE makes, you would take 20 people just to lift a bit of it. Everything is huge. Digital manufacturing company. What does that mean? Well, I hope you're interested in this because I'm fascinated. Just look down and go, oh, this is boring, and I'll stop. Every aero engine that GE manufacture has a digital twin. There are 190 sensors on every engine. And when it's on a plane in the air, its output is being monitored by its digital twin. So its digital twin knows what should happen. So when there's a deviation between the engine in the air and the digital twin on the ground, something alerts GE, so they come and check it out. Sometimes it's something they can fix immediately. Sometimes it's something they have to ground the plane when it next lands. Sometimes it's something really bad, and they have to say, right, get down to the nearest airport and land this plane because this engine's about to blow up. But they can monitor every single facet of the engine in flight, and they can make modifications in flight. They can send signals to the engine that will change some of the control systems. They can fix stuff while the plane is flying in the air, while practically nobody knows there's a problem. And every single engine will have its digital twin starting this year. It's unbelievable. This is a complete transformation. They have locomotives that now tell GE when brake pads need changing, when there's anything wrong with the engine, when there's something that's not performing to optimum, when a wheel is about to have some kind of problem. They can anticipate things that go wrong. So when they say digital manufacturing, it's not just a kind of slogan. They actually mean it. So this is the world changing in front of our eyes, and the response to that is learning that has to do these things. This is from the research from that report. So what we found was that digital age learning has to be engaging through exceptional and relevant learning experience. Engaging. No longer boring, page-clicking e-learning. Empowering, personalised and self-directed. Aimed at me, not anyone else. Ubiquitous, just in time, on demand and in context. A blend of social, experiential, formal and informal. Now you're going to have Charles Jennings talking tomorrow about 70-20-10. And very interestingly, a lot of those companies that I was working with in Europe said, don't mention 70-20-10, we're sick to death with 70-20-10. We did that 5 years ago, it's okay, we get it, we understand, don't say that is a revelation. We know that we're building blends that involve experience and involve line managers and all of that stuff. Very, very interesting. Next one, hyper-connected with analytics everywhere. And finally, a continuous learning behaviour, prompting inquiry, exploration, developing a learning culture. So they were the 6 characteristics of what learning has to look like to have a hope of engaging the workforce who are impatient, distracted, and time poor in coping with all those changes. It's fascinating. Now, out of those 6, which was the one that not one of those companies was really doing very well? Kind of a little bit of lip service, a little bit of tiptoe in the water, but hey, way behind on one of those 6. Anyone guess which one it is? Analytics, yes, analytics, exactly. Analytics. And those that said they were doing analytics were doing a very superficial analytics. Now, given the amount of data, if you think of 190 sensors on an engine, on a GE engine, think of how many touch points of data that your customers and you create in a working day. All the kind of time, every time you touch a keyboard, every time you go somewhere, every time you swipe a card, somebody is logging that as data. And yet, we never put it together. And we never use it as a way of driving what our learning needs are. And it would be very easy, relatively. Every time you stumble over something, that could be a red flag. Every time you cruise through something, every time you offer help rather than ask for help, could be a symbolic and useful piece of data that could be used to personalize and individualize. But hey, no one's doing it. That's the way of the world. That's obviously got to be a massive feature of the next generation of learning and the next generation of LMSs and experience platforms and all the other technology. It has to do better, not just capturing data, but helping with the analytics. Capturing data is all very well good, but it doesn't really mean anything until you turn it into useful and actionable items. And this is another thing that we discovered in this report. This is from Capgemini's corporate university. They sponsored the report. Why did they sponsor it? Because they were desperate to know what everyone else was doing. It was worth paying other people to come along and investigate. And this was their effort. And I quite like this slide. I'm sorry, there's a lot of words, but not I hope too many. And basically, the first generation of digitization was on the left-hand side. Capgemini called it virtualization. I didn't quite get that. I call it translation. So basically, the first wave was to take what we always did and translate it into digital. So what that meant was, that was e-learning. You took something that was delivered face-to-face, you wrote it down, stuck it on a computer, it was e-learning. You focused on taking content and virtualizing it. You digitized content, and you used that digital content to massify learning. It's a nice, horrible word, but it exists. Massify, in other words, instead of doing something to 40 people in a room, you did it to 4,000, 400,000, or however many. It was all about numbers, numbers, numbers. It was all about structured little bits of learning in very narrow fields. It says there in departments, but in silos. Learning silos, just like the previous generation, pre-digital. And the focus was on getting the technology right, building in the systems and the connections and all of the things that you needed to do. So that was the first wave. And what we found out in the report was that it's totally not enough. It is absolutely not enough. There's a second wave that we've got to get in touch with. And that second wave, I call transformation, they call digitization. I don't quite get the difference between those two terms. Anyway, use mine. So we go from translating to transforming. So instead of e-learning, we build digital and social learning platforms. We don't focus on contents, we focus on learners, we focus on the business. We don't want to massify, we want to personalize. We want to offer everything available to the needs of one. Facebook, call it. Facebook have a unique individual homepage. It's the world for me. And they have proved that you can do that. You can use algorithms to generate individualized learning. It's not about massification. It's about personalization. It's not about structured, siloed learning, but transdisciplinary stuff, trying to get people to see the connections and the patterns and work across the organization. And it's about building agility. And then it's not about just on the technology, it's on the community. It's building learning communities and learning cultures, which involves technology, but above all, it involves humans. One of the problems with this left-hand side is humans are kind of left out of the equation. But as long as we can get it to you on a screen, job done. On this side, it's all about what do you want, how do you want it, why do you want it, when do you want it, what fits in with your life and your world, what fits in with you being distracted and miserable and fed up and time poor. We'll try and accommodate that and make your life more exciting. So learning as a way of building engagement and excitement and helping make work more enjoyable, more transformative, more transformational, and to try to help people with the culture, all your people who are worried about getting older, don't know what the hell's going on, don't understand, see all these young whippersnappers in the workforce and don't quite get them. It's all about accommodating them and working out what they need as well as what younger people need to stay informed, to become essentially lifelong learners, to focus on building the responsibility for learning in the community and individual, not in 25,000 gigabytes of e-learning, which never worked. You know, the Skillsoft motto, which was, you need 100,000 courses, get it on Monday. That is no longer useful or acceptable as a way of promoting digital learning, i.e. the more the merrier, slap it on the table, we don't care, we'll just make it for you. And that's job done. 100,000 courses, done on Monday, finished. It's proved to be catastrophic in terms of uptake, enjoyment, resistance, and you get a whole bunch, you talk to people, you get a whole bunch of people in the workforce who absolutely hate you. They hate the learning that some of you provide for them, and they resent it bitterly that you even in their time poor world, they still have to do this rubbish, and they basically do it cynically and with as little effort as they possibly can to get through the minimum and then forget it as soon as they possibly can as well. So delight, excitement, engagement, building a new world, way to go. But if you want to be the ones, that's what we need. So, these are trends. Again, Josh Burson. Josh said, learning is going to be like Netflix. And that was all he said. And I think that's quite a profound statement. It's basically about the TV in your... How many people have got Netflix? Netflix is in New Zealand. Hey, look at this. See, most of you have got Netflix. But I've always said, I say, the great thing about Netflix is, as soon as you subscribe to Netflix, no one ever stops subscribing. No one ever does. Because it's cheap, and the way Netflix works is really engaging. So who said I did? You unsubscribe. Well, someone said to me, someone said exactly, I did. And they answered, and I said, why did you unsubscribe? And they said, well, my husband and I were saving for a deposit. We've actually cut back on everything, and Netflix was one of the things that just had to go. Why did you unsubscribe?
I unsubscribed because I watched everything that I wanted to watch. There's nothing else new on it.
Yeah.
So I signed up for a different one.
Right.
If they release something new, I would go back
Then you'll go
to
back to it.
But
Right, okay. What a mature consumer you are. Yeah. What do we like about Netflix? Let me try and guess. But what we normally like about Netflix is the fact that it doesn't just go, there's 2 million hours of stuff, go find what you want. Netflix comes up and says, hey, would you like that? And this is new, and I think you like that, and you've seen this, so I think there's a whole bunch of other things there. It's a carefully selected menu that if you think that your selected menu is like everyone else's menu, you're wrong. Go and have a look at someone else's Netflix, and you'll see, be careful, sometimes the Netflix menus are not what you want everyone else to see. But if you go to someone else's Netflix menu, it is completely different to your menu. Because Netflix, every time you do anything, it's learning. It's got algorithms working in the background, carefully selecting and personalizing the experience. So you get to like it more until it becomes pretty addictive. So you will switch on Netflix when you're bored and go, oh, I wonder what's on. And usually they've got so many new things coming on, apart from for one person in the room, they've got so many new things coming on. There's always, they go, this series, that, and go, by golly, where did that all come from? And if you just look at how much Netflix are investing in new content, it's billions and billions a year. More than the BBC. More content than the BBC. The main competitors for conventional TV is now Netflix and Amazon. Amazon, has anyone got Amazon Prime Video? I've got that too, yeah, I've got it. And I don't think it's as good. It's a kind of pale imitation of Netflix. And when you look at Netflix, you realise Netflix is clever. It's really slick the way they operate. So can you imagine learning being like Netflix?
So when you switch on your computer, it's suggesting stuff. It's trying to seduce you. And the more you do, the more it personalizes, the more it learns. And if you look at some of the new delivery platforms, what Josh Bersin was doing was comparing Netflix with, and Netflix versus Degree. It's almost identical. They're all stealing from each other. And they've all got algorithms running there in the background, learning about you. And there's some dodgy stuff. The idea that algorithms are morally neutral is rubbish because they're made by human beings. And the idea that Netflix is just looking to your best interest. What Netflix is doing is steering you gently away from the blockbuster movies which it advertises, which it doesn't want you to watch because it pays massive license fees back to the rights owners. So if you notice that Netflix will always direct you to stuff that they don't pay anything for, i.e. Netflix stuff, then it will point you to stuff that's very cheap. And only when you go down layers do you get to the expensive stuff. They're quite cynical about how they direct you. Their algorithms are not innocent. They don't care that much about you, but they care enough about you for you to be completely seduced and completely caught up in their world. And that's what we need to learn. If they can do it, we can do it. There's no reason why, not necessarily the cynical bit, but necessarily the personalization bit. It's quite extraordinary. So this is the trick. The trick is to personalize, but also scale. Anyone can do, Greek philosophers, amazing personalized learning experience, not very scalable, because when you were with Socrates, hey, that was it. So Socrates could have a handful of students, and if you go to fantastic universities like Harvard, even if they can scale up to a couple of hundred students, mostly it's a very narrow experience, very personalized, fantastic, but not for the vast majority because it's too expensive because it doesn't scale. We've got to learn how to scale and to personalize. That's our big breakthrough. And if Netflix can do it, don't let them beat you. You can do it too. Now, can I just share this with you? This slide looks a bit fussy, but it's actually quite simple. This is from a World Economic Forum report. I think it's quite interesting. And if I can explain it, it's relatively less horrible than it looks. What it's saying is that on the left-hand side is slower labour market disruption and higher adult skills, down to slower labour market disruption and lower adult skills. To the right-hand side, faster labour market disruption and higher adult skills, and faster labour market reduction and lower adult skills. So essentially, you want to be above this line across the top, and look at where the US is. The United States is below that line. So the United States is facing pretty fast labour market disruption, and it's got skills way below large numbers of competitors. Look at New Zealand. New Zealand is doing incredibly well. New Zealand is slightly behind the 8 ball in terms of market disruption. In other words, what's happening to you can see has already happened to Sweden, Finland, Germany, Japan, and the US, and other countries. This is a very selective group. So you've got the chance to look at what's going on there and adapt from a base of quite high labour market, adult education, learning skills, agility, adaptability. So it's basically saying the New Zealand education system is turning out the right kind of people who are ready to adapt to the changing market, which will hit you slightly slower than some other countries. So you're way higher than Australia. That must please you. You're well above Australia. And even countries like Germany and Japan are down below New Zealand and Australia in terms of how high your skills are and how adaptable your workforce is. So you're in a pretty good sweet spot, but that can all change. If you don't take the opportunities to adapt your workforce to the coming disruption, you're going to be stuck. And you're a small country with a relatively small economy, and the disruption, I think, could be massive for a country like New Zealand. You've dealt with it once when shamefully Britain went into the EU and just said goodbye New Zealand and destroyed your agriculture economy literally overnight. You rebuilt your agriculture economy. You now have some of the most efficient sheep farming in the world because you had to adapt and recognise that it wasn't all just in a ship straight to the UK. When I was a child, we had nothing but New Zealand butter and New Zealand lamb on the table. Everybody, it was just like lamb was New Zealand lamb, butter was New Zealand butter, and then it all stopped. So I was a child, I don't remember thinking very hard about that thing. Poor old New Zealand. We just kind of got on with it. But New Zealand would have thought very largely about it. Poor old New Zealand, it could have destroyed the economy. The same thing can happen again. But the key is not boats going to countries, it's people with smart skills and adaptable and agile. That's the absolute key to the future. And you're doing all right, I think. Now, this is interesting. This is someone called Tamer Elkalez. She was the CLO of Qualcomm, currently in a massive dispute with Apple, as you're probably aware, with Qualcomm for 22 years. Everybody knew her as the CLO of Qualcomm. She left Qualcomm and went to join a startup and lasted 3 months. Now she's working for a venture capital company called Atlantic Bridge. But what Tamara is saying is, this is the future. The future is not about learning, it's about talent. It's not about developing engaged, highly productive and high-performing materials. It's about developing engaged, highly productive and high-performing employees. It's the focus on people. It's about creating an amazing employee experience, embedding company culture, problem-solving and coaching, distributing user-generated content and peer learning. This is what she sees your role as being now. And how many of you are right across that frame? Probably not many. But it's a very interesting shift. So she's saying, you are in charge of the employee experience. Your job, and no one else's job, is to make it an amazing experience working for your organization. That is your job. And you have to do all of the things that make it an engaging experience, including developing the right skills and competencies and attitudes and behaviors that will stop your amazing employees getting fired 18 months down the track. Your job is to embed company culture. These are not common discussions, common points that you think about, but they're becoming more and more important. Companies start to differentiate by the level of engagement, the level of innovation, the level of agility in the workforce. Who's doing all that? You. That's your job. This is your age in a way that it has never been your age in the past. We've always worried about productivity in all sorts of different ways, largely through investing in technology and bigger machines. Now we're investing in brains, and bigger brains, more adaptable brains. Who can do that? If you can't do it, I have no idea who else can do it. But you've got to step up to the plate. You're right up there. You should be part of any discussion about where an organisation is going, what its strategy is. Because agility is becoming a critical skill. And we've spent probably hundreds of years bashing people and telling them, stop thinking, just do. This is your job. These are your competencies. This is your job area. Step outside that and we'll whack you around the head. Stop being curious. Don't ask questions. Just do it. Be competent. Do your job thoroughly well and everything is fine. And it isn't. We need people who can step across and work in different job areas, can build themselves and rebuild themselves as companies, build themselves and rebuild themselves. Agility is critical. Things like listening skills. We spend our whole life never listening to each other. And one of the great advantages of walk talk is you can't get out of listening. Well, you could, but you can just switch off. But if someone is talking to you, they will know immediately when you're not listening. We have CEOs who spend their careers speaking and formulating what they're going to say next. Not listening. Not listening. And we talk about active listening, and we talk about aggressive listening, really engaged listening. Reflection. How much of our world, how much permission do we give people to reflect? And yet reflection is absolutely critical to learning. Can't learn anything. The brain can't learn anything without a chance to process. It needs to reflect, And someone has to argue for the space to reflect. Not fire people because they're staring into space or sitting quietly in a corner. It's actually part of their work, but we don't know that. And then the huge advantage of building challenge into people's lives. One of the problems we've got with the ageing workforce is that we've stopped challenging people over 50. We give up. We think, oh, you just take it easy, mate. You'll be all right. Just don't you worry. You're cruising on your way to retirement. The worst thing you could ever tell anybody, the worst thing you could ever do to their brain. People over 50 should be learning new stuff and building neural pathways and staying neurally plastic in order to be able to cope with changes in their brain chemistry, which may or may not occur when they move into older age, from 60 and 70. Those with cognitive surplus, cognitive reserve, survive brilliantly in the modern age and in old age. Those who don't, who've got habits and never challenge themselves and do the same thing, same job, 20 years, 30 years, the minute the chemistry of the brain changes, bang, because their brain can't rewire. Those who've got cognitive capacity, the brain can rewire, not necessarily rapidly, but can rewire around early signs of Alzheimer's, can rewire around early signs of dementia. Those whose brains are not plastic, they can't. So it's a service to your workforce to challenge them and not let them get into bad habits of habit. And I've shown you this, and I'm going to finish on this slide. This is a report that I was involved in by the Corporate Research Foundation. And this is a learning matrix. There's a lot of words, but there's 4 boxes, and it's the 4 boxes that are important. What the Corporate Research Foundation found from this report, the report is called Learning, the Foundation for Agility and Sustainable Performance. Learning, I'll repeat it, the foundation. What it's saying is that we do need to create productive learning, organisationally productive and individually productive. So organisationally productive is working in teams, increasing efficiency, working on increasing quality, after-action reviews, management training, social learning, quality circles, all of those things, which most organisations aren't even doing. We need to do those. And then individually, learning that's focused on helping an individual improve their performance, do their role really well, training, development, all of that kind of stuff. But that is only half the screen. There's an entire other half. And that is generative learning. So organisationally generative is new solutions, new markets, look at disruption, overcome disruption, online strategy jams, co-creation through action learning, helping individuals individually learn new key skills, new cross-the-piece skills, like teaching people critical thinking, teaching them new ways of being innovative, encouraging them to take risks and challenge, and building those things into the jobs. So we need to think in 2 separate ways, rather like we need 2 glasses in our VR to see in 3D. 3D learning is productive learning and generative learning, not just productive learning. So we've got to think again at all of the things that we do and start to work out what could be generative learning in your organisation. Final slide, and then we'll stop for a break. This is you've probably seen it before, I use it all the time. It comes from Tokyo, I took it in Tokyo. I just love the guy who bought that car and drove it home and opened his garage door, proudly reversed his car into the garage, and then he found it didn't fit. So instead of just going crazy, what did he do? He just thought, well, half a car in the garage is better than no car in the garage. So he's happy. Look, it's nice and clean and shiny. It's the smallest car in the world, and it still doesn't fit in the garage. But he's made the best of it, and I think that's what you've got to do, make the best of it. Be optimistic about what you can do. Recognise that you might not get the whole car in the garage, but getting half a car in the garage is a huge amount better than getting the full car in the garage. I'm going to stop there, and you're going to have some